Órale, chingar a su madre por allá.
Ya, entonces
Es que...
Váyase a chingar a su madre, cabrón,
Sí,
de aquí.
perdón.
No estoy gritando aquí babosadas.
a ver, ya.
Baboso.
Good morning, Montana, and good morning, world. This is Chris Hislop from the Montana World Affairs Council, welcoming you to another episode of Connect Montana. Thanks, everybody, for joining. This week, we're taking a closer look at Montana's very vibrant nonprofit community and paying particular attention to some of the nonprofits that have international engagement and or international operations to give us a little better understanding of what they do, why they do it, and what impact their work has. So I am extremely happy to welcome Mary LaPorte, who joined EcoViva, the board, in 2009 and has served as board chair since 2017. Mary led nonprofit organizations working in the field of community economic development, job training, and education and international development throughout her career. Mary was the founding executive director of Jane Addams Resource Corporation in Chicago, the founding executive director of the Center for Employment Training in Cleveland, and the chief operating officer of International Partners in Mission in Cleveland. Mary and her spouse Charles moved to Montana in 2011. Her volunteer involvement in Missoula centers around community, environment, and international affairs. She serves on the board of the Missoula League of Women's Voters and is a participating and very active member of the Montana World Affairs Council. Joining Mary is Luisa Ahern. She is the executive director of EcoViva, which is a nonprofit organization that works in partnership and solidarity with community-led organizations in Central America organized to achieve environmental sustainability, economic security, social justice, and peace. Ana Luisa holds a master's degree in marine biodiversity and conservation from Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. She's the co-founder of the Organization for Youth Empowerment, which provides education, leadership, training, and capacity building to low-income children and young adults in Honduras. She is originally from Washington, D.C. and spent part of her childhood in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. You are both very welcome. I think we'll first go to Mary for some introduction. Over to you, Mary.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for being here this morning. We're very honored to be able to provide some background on EcoViva, our partners, and our current work, especially in these related times with the COVID crisis. We wanted to begin with just a brief map of where El Salvador and Honduras are in the Central American region, and then briefly give you a size, geographic idea of the size of El Salvador. 18 El Salvadors could fit within the area, the geographic area of Montana. El Salvador is a country of 6.5 million people, while in Montana we have about a little over 1 million. EcoViva works with communities in the Bay of Jiquilisco, in El Salvador, and Barra Santiago in Honduras, mostly on environmental and conservation projects. In Honduras, our partner Red Comal works throughout the country. EcoViva is dedicated to supporting partners in our region. We work on providing dignified livelihoods, environmental sustainability, and social justice. We were founded 24 years ago in the wake of the Civil War in the region. And we began our work in El Salvador in the Bay of Jiquilisco, which is also known as the Baja Lempa area. We now work with organizations throughout the region. We do not take a top-down approach. We've always taken our key and direction from our partners. We believe that they know best what will work in their region, and it really is a very, it is our notion of what is sustainable. Our local partners lead the programs. We work on resource mobilization, direct funding and making connections to funders for our partners. technical assistance. We are able to bring in regional experts that might fill skills gaps that they would have in their own community. For example, hydrologists, engineers, planners, and others who could help supplement the work of our base communities. We are dedicated to building alliances, both within the region of Central America and North-South alliances, working with universities, Engineers Without Borders, local Rotary clubs. And then finally, there's a number of advocacy issues, both in the United States, North America, and in the region, as we help our partners work on fighting water privatization, fighting metals mining, and working on other projects that help small farmers support their work and local economies. Our original partners, I want to just talk about what we mean by partners. Our original partner in El Salvador is called the Mangrove Association. It's a social movement comprised of 100 villages and about 35,000 people. They were organized initially around disaster preparedness and responding to emergencies following Hurricane Mitch in the region, and then they've just grown from there. We have another partner in El Salvador, AMBAS, or the Women's Association of the Barra de Santiago. They are a women-led sea turtle conservation program, the only women-led organization in the region, and they also work on mangrove restoration, livelihood training for the local women, and empowerment programs. And then finally in Honduras, our partner in Honduras is Red Comal. And Red Comal is a network of cooperatives, small-scale farmers, microfinance associations, and entrepreneurs. And they provide training and access to funding and markets and small loans to help build the economy of Honduras. And they've really made incredible gains in strengthening farmers and supporting agro-ecological initiatives. Our partners' work is at the grassroots base level. They do community organizing, advocacy, disaster preparedness, environmental conservation, diversified agriculture, and work toward a solidarity economy. And you'll hear more about that later. Chris asked me just to say a few words about why this work is important to me. I've had the opportunity over the last 15 years to visit the region many times. I've gotten to know the people, and I'm so inspired by their commitment to their work. Now I'm seeing a second generation of leaders. They're young people who grew up working with their elders in their villages, and they're now leading the organization. And by supporting our partners, I've really come to know the power of what can be done when organized communities work together in all of these areas. And it's really the key is the organization and the support. It's a very, very powerful model. And finally, in this current context of where we are in the world, I really appreciate the opportunity to provide some concrete support for the work of communities at the base level. And I will be turning it over to Anna for some more information and description about the work. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Chris, for having us today and for giving us the opportunity to talk about our work in Central America and the response that our partners are currently mobilizing for the coronavirus pandemic. And like Mary said, we support grassroots solutions. And that really means supporting community organizations as they develop their own solutions to the problems they face. And some of that in our partners' work is implementing community-based initiatives that give community members ownership and decision-making power Having these direct stakeholders, the people who live on the land in question, have a seat at the table, have a voice, have decision-making power over their own future, over their own communities, is much more, in my opinion, ethically sustainable as well as efficient, and really promotes long-term sustainability in conservation projects, in organizing projects, in development projects, and all sorts of initiatives. So that's really the kind of philosophy behind our work. And our partners really were born out of community organizing. As Mary mentioned, there was a civil war in El Salvador, and after the war, these communities who had been displaced were relocated in a different region of El Salvador and had to come together to really face all of the challenges that their communities faced. In that is actually the kind of birthplace of the Mangrove Association, and it's similar in the other organizations that we work with as well. And community organizing, you know, it's kind of hard to visualize and talk about, because it's really people sitting around in a circle talking. And, you know, we've got lots of pictures like this of plastic chairs, people sitting around in plastic chairs. Isn't the most exciting or slick, but it is the most important part of our work. It is bringing communities together, and, you know, having our partners be leaders in their communities. Also, advocacy is a major component. This is a protest to stop water privatization in El Salvador. Our partners have stopped coastal development projects. They've ensured community co-management of protected areas, including the Bay of Jiquilisco Biosphere Reserve. The Mangrove Association are actually an official co-management entity in that national protected area. And they fight for human rights and environmental justice in their communities. Disaster preparedness is another major program, and one of the kind of catalysts for this organization, specifically the Mangrove Association, but also in Honduras, Red Comal does a lot of disaster preparedness work, training, and establishing emergency protocols in their communities, and preparing for upcoming natural disasters. So building refuge centers, shelters, establishing a system of early alert through megaphones in various rural communities so that they can communicate instructions efficiently with the community members. And given this region's vulnerability to natural disasters, increasing with climate change, disaster preparedness continues to be a very important activity. And it's what's enabled their swift response in this moment during this current public health emergency. Environmental conservation projects that our partners are involved in are sea turtle conservation. There are 4 species of sea turtles, all endangered, that nest on the shores of El Salvador, and they manage community-led conservation initiatives. Also mangrove restoration, where community members come out and restore the hydrology, the natural kind of water flow of the region, to let nature heal degraded areas that have been damaged by sedimentation, by development, deforestation, and sustainable fishing. So building or rebuilding marine habitat, protecting areas where fish breed, including mangrove forests, are all part of their overall kind of environmental conservation work. Diversified agriculture is very important, especially now with increasing food insecurity. And our partners actually teach and train small farmers how to diversify their crops, make organic fertilizers, use beneficial insects and plants as natural weed control or repellents. They also learn how to plant a diversity of crops, and using these methods to really increase the resiliency of small farmers, so that if there is, and there are many, intense droughts and floodings and periods of damage to crops, that if they have multiple species, multiple crops, if they have, a fish pond, fruit trees, chickens, a kind of more holistic farm, they are more likely to survive these periods. Different crops are more likely to survive difficult periods like droughts and floods, as some crops are more tolerant than others, for example. And so rather than having everything fail, as in a monoculture, monocrop, like just corn or just sugarcane, for example, this diversified agriculture approach is really building community resilience in the face of a changing climate and more difficulty in the future. So in terms of the coronavirus in Central America, this is kind of the current landscape. There are in Central America and the Dominican Republic 46,800 cases approximately. And as you can see, Honduras is number 3 in the number of cases. El Salvador is number 5. So the virus is really is growing, and it's increasing in number of cases. And what's very concerning about this is these countries don't necessarily have the public health infrastructure to really handle a large-scale pandemic. And our major concern is not only the public health of the community, but economic insecurity. So El Salvador was one of the first countries to fully lock down and establish very strict quarantine measures. And this really impacts rural communities that our partners work with, because I think it's something like 90% of the people in the Baja Lempa, for example, live day to day. So it's not even living paycheck to paycheck. It's day to day. What they are able to make in a day is what they use to provide for their families, to purchase food and supplies for their families. So having weeks, and at this point months, of unemployment is devastating for food security. And there's increasing hunger and food insecurity in Central America because of the quarantine measures more than anything else. So our partners mobilized immediately. They recognized that the quarantine measures would have incredibly negative impacts on their communities, and they mobilized and developed a response strategy that includes sanitation and safety, information, and food security. So I'll talk a little bit about each one of these. So before I do, I just want to talk about how local leadership is so important to this response specifically. Local leaders are best suited to address the specific needs and challenges of the communities they live in. They are trusted members of their communities already. They can deliver assistance quickly and efficiently. And while large international NGOs do important work, aid can sometimes be very slow to reach these communities and reach people most in need. There's bottlenecks in the government or in customs in getting the assistance where it's needed quickly.
Ana Luisa, it's Chris. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are slowly approaching our time. I wonder if I could ask you to maybe expedite a bit so we could take a few questions.
Absolutely. So The information is very important at this time. There was a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news. So our partners established community kind of information stations and used local community radio to deliver important information that people needed at this time. Sanitation and safety included handing out soap, hand sanitizer, and bleach, also setting up disinfecting stations where people could come and wash their hands if they didn't have access to potable water in their homes or limited access. Also ensuring that agricultural producers have proper protective equipment, and food security, delivering vegetable seedlings and supplies so families could start or maintain their own vegetable gardens. Also, delivering supplies to set up or improve existing chicken coops, and then direct short-term aid. So growing food and delivering it to people who were most in need. In Para de Santiago, for example, they handed out 40 emergency supply baskets to women-headed households, so single women who were the head of their households. And Red Comal in Honduras also delivered emergency kits to 30 rural families in Gracias, Honduras. So in short, funding grassroots decentralized action during a pandemic like this really makes it possible to reach more people in more places more efficiently with less resources, especially now with restricted international travel and logistical roadblocks. Prioritizing local collective leadership is saving more lives, and that's what our partners are doing. So, thank you so much for having us here.
Yeah, Ana Luisa and Mary, thank you so much for that. I mean, it is a fascinating and hugely wide range of programs that you all engage in. I wonder if I could ask you to stop the screen share so we could come back on. There we are. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that. Here's a question from somebody who's obviously been watching this week. As you know, we've had two other nonprofits who have international programs. And the question is, let me summarize. You talked quite a bit about the grassroots element and working within a community. And Ana Luisa, you talked about it being ethical and efficient. Could you talk a little bit about what is the impact of the way in which you work? In other words, it's not so much the what you do, but the how you do it. I think the question is asking you to compare that or contrast that with, why don't you just bring a program down, just throw it down and say, everybody just do this thing. What is the impact of the way in which you work?
Yeah, well, I think that the model of international development is shifting to recognize local leadership, local capacity. That capacity exists, it is there. And these organizations know how to, address the problems their communities face. And a lot of times they just lack resources. And putting the resources in their hands and allowing them to solve their own problems, is much more. I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to exist, right? They would have, we'd have equality, and obviously we don't, as we're seeing in this moment. But empowering and building local capacity is much more sustainable long term. I mean, there's that famous quote where if you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day. If you teach them how to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. So that is part of our philosophy. Also, decolonizing philanthropy. There is a history of kind of paternalistic colonial sentiment behind sort of the white savior arriving and solving all of the problems of these communities, and that's not a model we agree with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we have time for one last question. This one is my own question. I wonder if you could, if there is one, and if there is, if you could describe a little bit the connection between the community development work of EcoViva and other nonprofits, let's say in Central America, and what has become a politically hot button issue, immigration. However, I mean, more properly put, it's a social issue that concerns all of us all around the world. It's not a political issue as such. So is there any impact in the work that you do and the issue of immigration?
Mary, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that that's another reason why this work is important to us as Montanans. It's really addressing the push factors of migration. So helping people develop their own communities, improve their own homes, and so that they can stay and have a dignified livelihood. Most of the migration that we're seeing, the people do not want to leave their homes. They'd rather stay in the places that they love and with their family. And we've seen that. We've seen people return back to their communities and become leaders. And it's another model. It's another way that they are seen in their own communities and can develop themselves. I think it's just absolutely key.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's a very interesting and direct connection with Montana and a very important social issue. So if I'm just going to hand back to either Mary or Ana Luisa for any last words.
Well, we live in a very interconnected world. We've seen it now more than ever. And when you think about just the environmental programs that our partners are working on, really restoring and conserving the mangrove forest, for example, mangroves sequester multiple times more carbon than even the Amazon rainforest. These people are the least affected, and they're helping us. You know, migration, climate, other models of living in the world. I just think it's very enlightening for all of us.
Indeed, very enlightening for all of us also who participated. So thank you to Mary and Ana Luisa and to everybody who's come on today. I mentioned that we've had a couple previous shows, Monday and Tuesday. We spoke with David Cates from Missoula Medical Aid. Yesterday, we were talking with Alice Thomas from the Central Asia Institute. Both of those shows are on our YouTube channel and our Facebook. If you want to have a look at that, check it out. It was really a couple very amazing programs, as was today. And tomorrow we're going to wrap up, so you don't want to miss it. 9:30 again. We've got Lenka Beranova, who is the executive director of Seeds for Dreams. Lenka was born and raised partially in former communist Czechoslovakia. She and her family escaped. And now she is living in Bozeman and is a lecturer at Montana State University. So please join us at 9:30 tomorrow morning for that. If you have any other thoughts, any information, things you'd like to share with me, drop me a line at info@montanaworldaffairs.org. So until tomorrow, everybody, thank you for joining. Be well. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.